Welcome to the next episode of Oratio Podium. We're very glad to have Imran on board with us. He's a very experienced debater, having experience across multiple circuits and across multiple formats. He has also scored in major tournaments across the world, and I'm pretty sure his experiences would give us valuable insight. Here at Oratio Podium, we are bringing in new thoughts and new ideas across the debating spectrum and public speaking spectrum by involving new ideas and having you engage with the lives and conversations that different individuals from diverse walks of life have to improve you in your debating and public speaking journey. Imran, I'm very glad to have you on board. I hope I introduced you properly, but I will also like give you a bit of time to sort of highlight what you do and who you are to our viewers and listeners.
Okay. I don't like sounding braggish, but for the sake of the podcast, I will do it. Not braggish like, but yeah. So, my name is Imran Ilmam. I am a judge from Malaysian circuit. I used to represent Sunway University, and then I started moving to MMU Multimedia University. I am a three-time Asian Majors Breaking Judge, UADC 23-24 and ABP 2023. I have also gotten a judge award at UADC 2024, being the ninth best judge of the tournament. Alongside that, I have about 50 plus judge breaks at various international major tournaments across the world. Namesake includes Macau Debate Open, the Zagreb Pre Worlds, Docksbridge Open, and a whole lot that will take too much time if I mention them all. Um, I have a little bit of a speaking career for fun, but I don't think it is the main highlight of my career. I just kind of decided to speak for fun, but judging is the main thing. Aside from that, I do a whole lot of tournament organizing and coaching. So I run a tournament organizing startup, that's what you could call it, called Seasons Debating Organization, where we basically run tournaments for school kids across Asia, and we use the funds to donate to charity. And I've also done a lot of my own personal projects. The latest one was Serious Intervarsity, which was just a little tournament I decided to do for fun. I also have a funny tournament called Humor IV, which is on October, which is basically just a tournament with fun motions and getting debaters to speak. And yeah, finally, I do a whole bunch of coaching. I coach a Vietnamese company. I help coach a Singaporean company, and I do a whole bunch of free workshops. I have a YouTube channel that I just released a bunch of workshops for, and I do some private coaching for some people who are like asking me. I think that covers broadly everything about my debating career. So yeah, I'm very very excited to be here. Actually, this is the first ever podcast I've ever been on.
I'm very glad to have you on board, Imran. I'm sure you will do well. Just we know that you have a vast treasure trove of experience and different things that you can highlight to us and get us on the way with. So let's just start simple, I guess. So, what really got you into debating? So, where was your background, and with what point did you start in your journey?
So this is actually a funny story that I love telling people because the way I started debating is hilarious. So just to preface context, I did not do debate at high school, and the simple reason for that was because I thought debating was a scary sport that required you to argue with people, and I was to this day I still am a pretty non-confrontational personality. Like I was like the thought of debating, of needing to say you are wrong when I'm the kind of person to say, okay, no, it's okay, you're right. I don't want to fight you. You're right. So across high school, I never got exposed to debating, even though my school did have a debating club. My English teacher at during the eighth grade tried to get me to do debating once, and I was just like, no, this is too scared. But I did have a lot of public speaking experience, not competitive public speaking, but broadly public speaking in general. So I would always be the kid to do things like being the MC of whatever event our school was hosting, whether it be like a play or something. And I also engaged in storytelling competitions when I was in sixth grade. I was like 12 years old, etc. And I was always a little bit of like the talkative person, and I did not have any fear of talking in public. I did a bit of singing as well. So the whole speaking in front of people and just performing in front of people was never a fear for me. It's just that debating was not something that I ever thought about engaging with because I thought the activity was scary. So when I joined Sunway, so I did two courses in Sunway. Well, so the first was a pre-university course, which is called Foundation in Arts. During that 1 year period, I didn't engage in debating at all. I knew the existence of Sunway Debating Club. I knew it was a good debating club that performed well, but I just had no interest. And then when I finally joined from the pre-uni course to the degree course, my bachelor's course, I had this friend. He's a good debater from Sunway. He's now in LSE. So this is where I'll start the story. So at on this fine Thursday, it was the end of like a music event. I think it was an end of so it was the end of our music society, and the event had ended, and we were just doing like the post event dinner. So me and two friends of mine, we were going to a convenience store. It was one of those 24/7 convenience stores, and we were just basically hanging out there till like 3 a.m. in the morning, just because I didn't really care about going home. We had nothing to do, so it was just there for vibes. And then my debater friend, he just coincidentally comes into the convenience store, and he sees me, and he's like, "Oh, hey." And then we just start talking there. And it was just a normal conversation, and then suddenly it trended into debating, where I just brought up how's debating, and he just talked to me about his debating life. And then around that time, I told him about like, "Oh, this debating thing sounds pretty cool. You look very good at it, but I don't think I could do it." And my friend was just like, "Just join it. It's not that intimidating. I'm sure it'll be a good experience for you." And in that moment, I was like, "Sure, I guess. Why not?" So I took his advice, and I just went into the next meeting. And then in the next meeting, it literally just wasn't it. So this was prior to their orientation, so they didn't really have a new freshers intake yet. So when I came to the first ever meeting, my first ever meeting, it was just two people. I'm not sure if you know these two people, but those two people were Raymond Kimura, who's the world's ESL semi-finalist, and Cheng Zhu, who is a UADC quarterfinalist now. I had no idea who they were. I came in, and they're like, "Okay, it appears it's just this new person and Raymond." So they started talking about this classic motion of, I think it was, art should not be related to the artist, and I was just there like, I have no idea what you guys are saying, but this sounds cool. And then they told me, "Hey, you should come to the orientation. It's gonna be fun." So then I came to the orientation, and from there it's history. I decided to just be like, I'll stick to the sport. I came to weekly meetings, and then I started watching debating on my own, and I started to realize, wow, this is actually a pretty cool thing to do. It's actually a pretty cool activity. So yeah, that's the humble origins of my debating career.
That sounds like a very fun journey. But I think even in our like small accounts in terms of how we are getting into debating, we do need something to motivate us. I think a friend or a colleague or somebody else, or maybe somebody around us who maybe we are looking up to, that does help us like continue with our debating journey. But were there any other things which sort of like kept poking you at or kept poking at you to so that you could do better, or maybe you felt that at this point of time you needed to do something extra from what you were doing? So in that journey or in that space of time that since you started till now, what sort of like kept motivating you to keep going ahead?
So prior to debating, I had a lot of experience music as like an extracurricular activity. So I think that was my main hobby before debating took over. Um, that period of time was when I started to feel a little bit burnt out from music, or rather, I wanted to do something different from music. So I'd say this is the first part. It was more of just the fact that I wanted to think about doing something else, and debating naturally became the next step upon it. I think the second indicator that helped me personally, like move forward in debating as like trying moving forward as how I could improve and motivate myself, was the realization that debating linked towards a lot of the interests I had as a person. And I think this is a lot of reason why people debate and stay in debating. Because debating connects to a core part of who your identity is. Sometimes you make that realization, sometimes you don't. For me, I made a little bit of that realization when I realized that I liked speaking out my opinion, and I liked just doing that act of public speaking, because I always saw it as a little bit of an art, similar to how singing is an art, where you sing and you make good melodies. Public speaking and debating combined with being a nature of a niche public speaking sport is all about the art of rhetoric, which is the whole part of persuasion added in. And I think if you figure out that that's a part of your identity, that's when you sort of start to realize this is something I really want to do more. This is something that gives me a lot of, like, we debaters say catharsis and self-actualization, but in more realistic terms, it is something that genuinely makes us happy because it is something that we know we can do and we can enjoy. So I made that realization when I was just a freshie, was just starting out. Even though I was bad and I kept getting like 72 belows, it didn't care for me that I just kept feeling. It didn't care for me that I choked. Like, there would be some times in freshie meetings where I stood up and I only spoke for 10 seconds because I was like, I have no idea what I'm saying. But that realization, and alongside the inspiration of seeing my seniors seeing these really good seniors debate so well, completely out of my league, and being like, I want to be like that too one day. I think all of that adds into how it sort of encapsulates your motivation to want to be a better debater. Of course, not everyone will have that realization, and not everyone will ever feel like debating connects to them. Maybe they just do it because it's a fun thing they want to spend out with friends. And if that's the case, I think it's okay. Like if you just do it because it's a friend activity, then it's still fine. But I think in terms of how it related to me, it was definitely such a really strong push that got me to want to start out like the very beginnings of my journey and try to see if I could live up to the grades that like my seniors had set up for me in some way or form.
So I think that's a very interesting perspective as well, right? Because I think primarily there's a very big necessity for us to have a good structure around us for us to do better. And you say a lot about your seniors and how they helped you. And I think Sunway also has, I, to my own personal knowledge, I'm not from your country, so I don't have that much awareness. So probably a good debating culture as well. So what do you think is the importance of these good institutions where you get the idea about good debating from good debaters who have come up? So do you think these institutional setups help you, and what kind of like things have you seen in Sunway and around you in your circuit which has sort of given you that experience before we segue to the next section?
Yeah. So if you ever get into contact with my seniors, so really strong people like Shireen Ali and Raymond Kimura, they will probably tell you that the institution helps out a lot of the younger debaters going into who they become in the future. And I would say that is true. I think the reason that that's important is because having a strong institution gives you two things. I think the first is a platform to constantly practice and spar and constantly just get that experience. And I think even if you fail, what is valuable is that you always have a experienced senior who's there to give you feedback, who is there to give you very extensive feedback. I think the reason I managed to improve so much was because I got so much invaluable feedback as a debater, but also alongside that, I was a person who asked too many questions because I was just a very curious fella. I really just wanted to know more. So I think if you're lucky and you have seniors who have the patience and also like the willingness to kind of guide you, especially if you're a bit curious and wondrous, um, because I think when you start off debating, there is a bit of a high skill ceiling because you're figuring out fundamentals like analysis, you're figuring out fundamentals like rebuttal, you're figuring out a lot of these fundamentals like I one time I still remember the one time I asked my senior, what is a comparative? Why do people say comparative all the time? And they're like, this is a comparative. And I'm like, I still don't get it, but I'll try to figure it out. So all of these guidance, like the willingness from your seniors to guide you, especially if you're a junior who is interested, I think that's what really, really helped me. And I think most institutions who succeed, even if the seniors aren't like world breakers, even if the seniors aren't like maybe they are just regional breakers, but they have experience, as long as seniors have that willingness to maintain an institution of uplifting juniors and having that ability to encourage, I think that is probably an incredibly important thing because it was not just me who succeeded in that environment. There are so many other juniors who are on my batch who have made very lucrative careers for themselves even after leaving Sunway. I'm talking like I think Austral's ESL semi-finalists and World's Breakers beyond after that. So that's I think the most important factor. I think the second and most crucial factor here is, and this is a bit unfortunate to mention, but in the real debating is a very expensive sport. Unfortunately, it's just really expensive. Majors is inaccessible to the vast majority of people. I wish there was a way around that, but we're probably hopefully the people who are in power figure that out. So the reason most institutions can even afford going to majors is because they have backing from their administration. Sunway is very, very lucky to have massive backing from their administration. They fund a lot of their major strips, and they have a very, very good like relation with Sunway because Sunway Debating Club has a good portfolio of achievements. So it's like a fulfilling prophecy of you have a good portfolio, we give you money. You maintain that portfolio, we give you more money. This second step, unfortunately, is like just the sad truth. And if there was a way to make debating cheaper, this would make much easier. And even then, some institutions simply cannot get the backing. I've had horror stories of my friends from other institutions telling me that their admin doesn't take debating seriously. They think admin is this little vanity sport where it's just people yelling at each other. It doesn't do anything for them, and it's been impossible. Given that I'm in a uni, I also fear that I have to face these challenges being the leader of my new club as well. But yeah, I think all in all, those two things are incredibly important to guide certain debaters, specifically institutions, on a new level, especially if they really, really want to take that sport. But yeah, I think that's what my perspective on it is.
Interesting. I think the primary thing is that there are also regional differences. I think people in India do not really acclimatize themselves too much to the sport. They don't even understand it properly at times. So even in my institution, there was a lot of problems for me because they did not like establish funding. So it wasn't easy to access other parts because, like for example, in India, Delhi has a lot of concentrated tournaments. East India does not. So for me to even go into circuits like Delhi, which is the North Indian circuit in India, would become very hard. So I think institutions do play a fundamental role. There are ways in which we can make things better. I think there are a lot of forums which have given half or partial funding to teams. I just saw a post on Facebook today morning itself. I think Pakistan Debate Forum was organizing a pre-UADC to just fund some teams to ABP or UADC. I'm sure there are other tournaments also which do the same things, so that teams can be sent to these regional majors as well and increase the ambit of accessibility. And hopefully we can also contribute to a certain extent in the future. But then I think the fundamental part is that there are differences, right? I think Sunway has established this principle that they will fund their institution debaters. I think that's a very unique perspective to take for them as well. But maybe my experiences are very different as a circuit from yours. So let's just talk a bit about in this next segment how things are in Malaysia, just to give our viewers and listeners a perspective about how the Malaysian debating circuit is. So what would you find unique about your debate culture, or what do you find unique about the Malaysian debate circuit, or how can you give us a brief overview about what Malaysian debating looks like?
So it's actually interesting. I've always talked about this to my other debate friends. So the the headline of all of this question, before I get into the details, is that it is a very decentralized but also um, dedicated circuit. So why is it decentralized? Contrary to other debating countries, probably Hong Kong or China to name a few, or even like I think some the United Kingdom, Malaysia's debating circuit is not really centralized towards a governing body, like one governing body that manages all forms of debating. We have multiple bodies that are not even authorities in nature, they're mostly just unions or councils. So for varsity debating, which I'll focus on more, we have the Malaysian Debating Council, and they're not necessarily an authority per se. I mean, they are a union. They have like they work like a council, so they will typically use mechanisms of democracy to do things like decide on nationals bids for our national competitions. For context, Malaysia does have an official national tournament. We have the Malaysian Nationals Intervarsity Debating Championship, aka MNIDC, which is the BP version, and then we have the Malaysian Nationals Universities Debating Championship, which is the AP Nationals. We also have other quote unquote national tournaments that are hosted by the government. So the Ministry of Education does have some national tournaments they organize, but no one really takes those seriously because it's a long story that the summarization of it is that the government hosted tournaments are typically terrible because they get teachers for judges, and it's really not a good like quality judging. So most people focus only on the Malaysian Debating Council's tournaments, which is the typically recognized nationals. So in terms of the way the circuit works, we typically operate behind those things within the union. But the reason it is decentralized is because the union, the Malaysian Debating Council, does not act as like a supreme governing body over every other debating circuits. So every single debating circuit ends up mostly doing their own thing. Like we don't typically have like organized training sessions. We don't have like cross spars as much. I'm sure we do, but it's just very internal spars. So it's never really public. There have been some initiatives, but it's just never really worked out. Or even if it has, it's very, very short term and it just runs out. So what that has ended up is a circuit where you have many different clubs who are kind of doing their own thing, but they're still friends with each other. So for example, a lot of clubs are typically on good terms with each other. Like the University Malaya Debating Club is good friends with like Sunway because a lot of juniors from Sunway go to UM for their degree because it's a law school, it's a big law school. And then UT Mara as an institution also has a lot of like good relations. And then you have recently IIUM, which is like the new hotshot of Malaysia, come in, and like they're also now big players. But it's not really like a stiff competition thing. At least to my knowledge, I'm not sure if there's any drama that goes on because I'm typically the kind of person to stay out of it. But I do know that there is like a nice friendly relationship. So I think the analogy to use here is that it's kind of like communes, or like just communes that interact with each other. Like you're cool, we're cool, but it's not like linked towards what one central authority, as unless it's during nationals where everyone just comes together. And if you want to change the constitution of the Malaysian Debating Council, then we will run it in the council meeting. If you want to do some changes to the novice criteria, funny story, the novice criteria for Malaysian nationals has changed 3 times in the past 3 years. I used to be a novice because they didn't, for some reason, they didn't see judge majors break as a criteria. So I had to double check, and the president of the council was like, "Yeah, you are a novice. Even though you have broken UADC, you are a novice." And I think I'm not sure if that was the reason that they decided to change it again, but they changed it right after that my situation. So I'm no longer a novice because I've broken more than 3 opens. But yeah, I think going back to the question, it is definitely quite decentralized because we don't really have any big governing body that like micromanages or like keeps these unions together. It's mostly just like we are friends, some they are friends with each other, or we have like work relations with each other. If there's a collaboration, it's mostly very bilateral, like it's just one to one. It's not like with organized or micromanaged by the council in nature. I just want to preface this that I'm speaking on a perspective of like, well, I guess you could call it an outsider. I've never been in the position of power in the Malaysian debating circuit. I don't intend to, not because I don't like it, but because I'm not really interested in getting into council positions. I'm just more of a I'll engage and have fun. I'll do like what I can do to help the circuit, but I'm not really that interested because I think there are probably other people who are more capable than me, or I will do that. So what I could say may not be entirely accurate. This is just basically an observation I've made in the 2-ish years I've been in the Malaysian debating circuit.
Perfect. I think a couple of fundamental differences that we find here is also that councils are something which operate on a very different level. I think in India also there's no centralized council, which creates a lot of problems. I think even during WDC voting and other procedures, that council not being present does give you sort of like problems in terms of the UADC and everything. So very interesting perspective that you highlighted here as well. But let's just go into some sort of like problems that you might have addressed or might have found. So while you were debating in Malaysia, is there anything fundamentally underlying that you found very problematic, or do you find that there's some issues in terms of maybe say access or other things that you could sort of like discuss, or maybe something else that you would find very dominantly present in your world as well?
Yes, so I think every single debating circuit is not perfect. Every single debating circuit has its own demons. Uh, I have heard some stories from other Indian debater friends of mine, and like now hearing your perspective, I've seen some problems. So Malaysia also has a fair share of problems. This is not to the fault of any specific person or institution. This is just systematically a problem that's completely out of really anyone's control. So the biggest problem, I think you just said it, is accessibility. The problem is that, as I highlighted just now, only some institutions really have the ability to secure funding from their administrations to be able to get debating. And institutions typically have a lot of free cash flow, like not cash, sorry, like cash lying around in their treasury, in their treasury accounts to be able to do things like coaching, hire coaches for the institutions, and be able to do this. The other thing that plays part is the time of debaters. So in the big institutions where debating is seen as a culture to take seriously, you just will empirically have more people who are willing to trade off their time for debating. In a non-developed institution, you kind of just have to get really lucky. You have to get really lucky that there's just one junior who is willing to go on that journey and willing to do that. And even then, I think the problem is that a lot of the institutions who do not have this, so there are unfortunately a lot of institutions in Malaysia who were not able to reach that same level, not to the fault of anyone. It's just it's systemic. It's just a structural barriers problem, right? Where they really have not been able to scrounge money to get coaching, and the debating culture is not well developed because they do not really have a guiding force to kind of direct them to like how to get better in debating. So what ends up happening in the Malaysian circuit is that there is a very clear, unfortunate divide between what are clearly the strong institutions and what the non-strong institutions are. And this is something that can easily be observed if you see any tabs of past nationals, where it is always going to be four institutions. I will not name them, but if you see tabs, you will know what I'm talking about. 4 to 5 institutions, which will always break open at the very top, and the rest of the institutions are basically fighting for a novice break and fighting for that novice category. Um, because it's the classic inequality thing, right? Where the stronger will get stronger because they have all the resources, and the novices, like in the non-developed institutions, stay as novices even if they've debated for 3 years, because they simply were not able to access the same level of resources or coaching. Of course, not to the fault of anyone, as I've mentioned so many times, but it's really sad because they don't have the money and they can't get the members to you can't get a members to create a form of debating institution. And even when they were able to get a dedicated set of members, so I know some underprivileged institutions which have still have really strong debating cultures. The issue is that despite that strong debating culture, they just have no point of guidance, and they also have no reference point. Like, they can't really go to tournaments to understand how debating is like, because tournaments are expensive. The average cost for a tournament per person, to my knowledge, is like 25 USD per person, which is an expensive price for specifically underdeveloped circuits. And Malaysia, we are technically still a developing country, so the currency is not as strong. We cannot afford it. So a lot of debaters cannot afford international tournaments willy nilly, etc. So it's very hard for them to get the reference point of what good debating is, and of course, it's very hard to get another point of reference point, which is the guidance that I had lucky to have, but not everyone has. So yeah, access is a problem, and that leads to a bit of an inequality problem. But of course, it's not the case where like the rich are exploiting the poor. I guarantee you that no one in University Malaya is trying to exploit the underprivileged institutions. They're trying to. I think there have been efforts in the council where people from these positions of power have been trying to do things like, "Hey guys, let's try to run some free courses for the underprivileged institutions. Let's try to get some like quotas." So lately, we have been getting some quotas from so we call it the non-Klang Valley institutions, where they can access nationals at a cheaper price. And there's been a collective effort to try and help underprivileged institutions lately. So thankfully, there are good people in the circuit. There are very good people in the circuit, even when they are in positions of power, who generally try their best to help the people in the lower. Yeah. So I think that is the biggest problem in Malaysia. But to end thoughts on optimistic notes, we have to take efforts. There's not really much malicious people. Even if there are, it's a very like anomalous. It's a very anomaly, a big anomaly where someone tries to disrupt the system and tries to cause trouble between others. I'd say lately we haven't really had those anomalies, thankfully. So it's been a slow, steady upward to try and make like the environment a little bit more conducive for these underprivileged people and institutions.
Perfect. I think there are a lot of discussions to be had, right? Because people in positions of powers do need to have some sort of outlay into these particular segments so that they also understand and reciprocate to the problems in a way in which it is helpful to institutions which do not have access. So I think there is a lot to be done. A lot of people actually step up to the plate and do these things. A lot of people need to have discussions, and I think that is also primarily what our goal is, right? To have this discussion, to have sort of like get more people into the idea of change and into the idea of maybe making things better for people. But I think you've also debated across different places in and around your region, right? And I think also in India also you've done a couple of tournaments. So in this next segment, let's just talk about what your differences and experiences were, maybe as a debater from Malaysia in these particular circuits, or maybe what these cultural differences in these circuits were, right? So when you were particularly doing these events or stuff around these countries, what sort of came to your mind first?
Yeah, okay. So I'm going to split this into different regions. So I have debated mostly in obviously Malaysia, but mostly also in the Philippines. Philippines is probably the biggest one I've gone in. India is I've had a lot of experience. I call a lot of tournaments in India, so I have quite a lot of perspective on that. And I also talk about the Western circuit, so specifically Europe, and to some degree North America. So I think for the context, I will start with India because I think that one is probably most people want to see an outsider's perspective on India. So I think the Indian circuit, based on my experience in debating, so I think the first observation I make as an outsider is that the style and the structure that most debaters have and most judges have. So when an Indian debater gives a speech and when an Indian judge gives an OA, the manner and the structure that they give it is very different to other circuits. So, just to give a perspective, I think the average Indian debater debates in a very conversationalist style of way. So, some debaters use a lot of numbering, but I think a lot of Indian debaters who argue tend to be very like, I'm not sure if the word is conversationalist, but they're explaining it to you as if it was a conversation. Like when they prove mechanisms or when they are trying to give rebuttal, like it's not very rigidly numbered, like three reasons why you are wrong. It's more of just, you are wrong and this is why, and they just go on a long depth, rigorous explanation of why they're true. So I think that is very different because in the circuits that I've come from, usually like Malaysia and specifically Europe, which is where a lot of the judging I focused on recently, where there's big culture on making sure you are flag posting, which is like making sure that you're telling the judge where exactly in your speech you are. In India, there's less of an emphasis to do that because I think the reason is that people just understand that when you are debating, even if you're not pointing out to where you are right now, they know where you are. So whenever I judge an Indian debater and I'm judging a full like BP round or a full AP round when I was scoring these tournaments, I always notice that they are just going with the flow, but you kind of see where they're coming from. They don't flag out this is my first argument. They don't flag out this is my second argument. They're just going on. When they do framing, they don't like sometimes after they finish their framing, they don't really signify if they're already starting their argument. At first, it was confusing for me, but as I got used to judging the Indian circuit, I mostly just was able to pinpoint that. And I think it's actually not a problem because I've seen some really good Indian debaters who do not bother about trying to do this flag posting thing. Like they will not be like three arguments in my speech, A, B, C. They will just go right into it. And I think this presents a pretty interesting form of argumentation, specifically in the Indian circuit, based on what I have judged and what I have seen. So it's very like going in. Yeah, sorry about that. No, I'm doing it here. I'm doing it here. You can cut it out. Sorry. Basically going back to it, right? So it creates it's a very interesting culture where debating is seen as less of a overly technical or overly like we must stick to this structure, and more of just when you prove something, prove it to the best of your ability without needing to follow some form of like burden structure or format. And I think that's very interesting because like it makes into some very interesting way that debaters prove things where there's a lot of rhetoric in the manner that they use it, but also there's some negative sides. So I'm gonna say this in the least like I think the Indian circuit has a lot of straw manning, unfortunately, at least to my knowledge. A lot of the novices and even intermediate debaters are very privy to things like straw manning and misrepresentation of cases. But even if you take away that, I think take away that like bad faith engagement, the ones who are engaging in good faith engagement typically are able to develop very rigorous cases without needing to follow like the meta of other circuits. In terms of the judging, I think this one is also quite different. I think the Indian circuit has a style of judging where they prioritize things like, you are establishing your standards, you're establishing your metrics of the debate, you are establishing you are very, very clear on what the core issues of the round are. And I think the method of evaluation that Indian debaters go through are not too entirely different from what other circuits go through. I think there's no massive fundamental difference because judging is a little bit more centralized compared to speaking. Because in speaking, you have a lot of leeway on how you want to argue. You have a lot of leeway in how you want to structure your argument. In judging, you have to stick to a core few principles of evaluating based on a certain set of agreed upon metrics and being able to adjudicate whether or not a team was able to persuade whether their case achieved those metrics. I think the way the Indian circuit does this is to take those standards a little bit more literally and point it out a lot when they're giving their oral adjudications. So there's a lot of emphasis on making sure you're following the standard of judging and like evaluating in good faith. Even in the intermediate to novice judges I have who are getting a grasp of it, like I've cored a lot. I've been able to observe a lot of judges who I may not know personally, but I know like they do this. I think this is something that I have personally observed when it comes to the Indian circuit. And if you've seen higher level Indian debaters, so the people from like I think DTU and IGNU and like the really good Indian judges, Pranav, who have had a chance of coring before, a very, very fun time. I think they take what I seem to be like the fundamental like description of what I think Indian debating is, and they're able to use it to break upon and beat other circuits with their own strengths. Because I noticed that Indian debaters, when they debate internationally, they do not bother about like trying to adapt to the meta. So if you've seen like a speech that the Indian teams has given in Australs, like the Australs ESL team who won, I think, I'm not sure which institution was that. They they still remain in their style. Like they do not try to follow other styles. They have a very unique identity of debating, and I think that's pretty cool. Clearly, it is successful and that works. So next, I'll go on to the Philippines. So the Philippines has a little bit of some similarities with like Indian circuit, but the slight difference is that there is a little bit more emphasis on trying to be technical. So things like there's a lot of words on like analysis and meta use, and I think overall debating in the Philippines is there's an attempt to try and be as technical as possible, maybe in a bad way because they think jargons are analysis, which is like not a very good culture, but also in terms of like the way that they argue is very like they try to make it rigid and they try to make it like as if the judge is listening, because there's a big emphasis on things like flag posting. There's a big emphasis on things like establishing what your burden of the case is in your speech, following what is your impact for this, what is your, where is your premise, etc., and things like that. At least based on what I've seen in the Philippine circuit, especially in the novices to intermediate circuit, there's a big focus on that. In terms of judging, take what I mentioned about Indian judging in terms of establishing standards and upgrade it by one. There's a big emphasis on things like establishing your standard and metric when you're judging, and things like mentioning like these different comparatives and how you evaluate these comparatives in Philippines judging. Like there's a big burden on trying to make sure that you are being very rigid and structured towards what their culture of judging is, which is as I'll explain later when you come to European circuits and like Malaysian circuits, does play a part in terms of how rigid they take their judging specifically, right? So I think it's very also another interesting like perspective to see how the Philippines debates. High level Philippine debating and judging is a bit different. I think they are more in line towards like majors meta. We're just trying to be comprehensive and trying to stick close to fair adjudicating without sticking to a specific structure particularly. But I think in the intermediate to novice circuits, this is what I've noticed in terms of Malaysian debating styles. So I cannot believe I'm saying this, but I have debated more internationally than I have debated in Malaysia. So my perspective of the Malaysian meta is very, very like um, not well developed. Because for context, I had missed a bunch of nationals, so I'm not really sure of what the culture of Malaysian debating is. And I have asked other people, and they say we don't really know for sure what makes Malaysia as a special debating. But I think there's something else I can point out. So I think firstly, style is something that Malaysia uses quite well. So we're very stylistic speakers. Not the most stylistic compared to like WSDC kids, but there is a good use of rhetoric and manner in Malaysian debating. So if you've seen the high level Malaysian debaters, they speak in a way which sounds nice to hear. It's very structured. They kind of have like that little bit of WSDC blood in them where they will flag post everything to you. There's like three levels of analysis. They always say there are three levels of analysis to this argument, and they'll kind of go into order. And when they explain things, it's very structured and clear to hear, which is a little bit different from like um, the way that the Indian circuit explains, because the Indian circuit does not, in my perspective, does not really care about wanting to style those things, and they just kind of go with the flow and explain flowistically. Like, so there's a big of a structure difference. I'm not going to say which one is better than the other because I've seen this Indian structure beat Malaysian debaters, and I've seen Malaysian debaters beat Indian debaters. But there's really not been like one over the other per se. The other thing I think I'd point out about Malaysian debating is that Malaysian debating has a big emphasis, in my view, of explaining things in a way which just make sense. So intuitive cases, etc., and just cases that have like a pretty reasonable analysis that you can buy without like having to without needing to kind of like yeah. And I think it comes. This is a comment I make mostly on the novice circuit, where you mostly get a lot of intuitive cases, and you can't really get away with a crazy argument to run unless you're some specific debaters. If probably like I think other Malaysian debaters have a greater perspective on what this is, because oddly enough, being a Malaysian, I engage more internationally compared to Malaysia, mostly just because I've had more success internationally than I have in locally, though I am planning to change that locally. I am going to speak nationals this year. Finally, on the European circuit. So European circuit, I think, is the biggest cultural difference. Their way of debating and judging is very, very different meta. Like there's a very big difference in Asian debating and European debating. For one, they care a lot about burdens. I think they care really much about burdens, and not just burdens as a concept, but they apply burdens to everything. Burdens in the sense of, did you prove your case? Did you prove your premise? And measuring whether or not your analysis was indeed good or not good. So there's a very big emphasis on not relying on what I call impact judging. So I think in Asia, broadly, most all Asian circuits, there is some degree of prioritizing impacts over analysis. So if you give a good set of impacts, most likely you will probably win because you gave reasonably good impacts that like etc. In Europe, even if you have a good impact, but your analysis was as weak compared to some other analysis, that other team's analysis would win, even if it was a small impact, because they really care about logical, like making sure you have proven your case logically, and if you have any forms of logical fallacy or logical flaws in your argument, you typically will not make it, or you typically will not get the first, etc. And this also applies a lot to the judging meta, in terms of the fact that judges are asked very heavily to scrutinize the level of analysis that is given to a team's claim. And I think, in my experience judging high level European tournaments, there's a very big emphasis on, did they actually prove their reasons or not. And in the debating, I think this is why European debating has gone a little bit more in terms of the true technical style of claim, prove that with a bunch of reasons, make sure that your claim is correct, and then after you feel confident that your claim has been proven, then you can get on to impacting that argument. In Asia, it's more of like, I'll give an argument, I'll give some analysis, I'll give some rigorous analysis. Maybe it's true, maybe it's not, but like depending on the debate. But and then they'll focus a lot on the impacting because they want to make it sound powerful. In Europe, I think there is still an emphasis on wanting to make your case sound powerful, but the emphasis mostly comes out on how you prove things. And I think the North American circuit also has a little bit of this. I have the least amount of experience in North America. I don't really judge much there. But North Americans who come to European tournaments mostly kind of still follow that same style of making sure that they are proving things. So yeah, that is my broad perspective. This is very subjective perspective, by the way. This is based on what I have seen. This is something that everyone has a different take on. I think some other person will probably say Malaysia is actually technical. It's not rhetorical. I think it's a little bit more rhetorical than technical, but we still have some level of analysis priority given there.
Perfect. I think that was very detailed exposure as to how different tournaments and different circuits work. But also, I think there are a lot of fundamental differences that I have myself personally experienced when I was doing debating. Um, for example, Australia has probably a similar sense that they don't really prioritize impacts. They have probably prioritization over on analysis and reasoning and the way in which the arguments are presented. And I think your portrayal of the Indian circuit also was pretty interesting in the way in which it operates. In this next segments, let's just dive into your particular organization, right? You constituted something called seasons debating. So what was the idea behind this particular organization, and what motivated you to start, and what is it about?
Okay, so seasons. So the way that seasons started is very interesting. Seasons was, so technically I'm a co-founder of Seasons. I founded it with another person. His name is Peters. So I was actually asked to help with Seasons a while back, on behalf of like helping out a friend, because it was just a group of debaters who wanted to run a tournament for fun. That was initially it. It was just supposed to be a one-off tournament. That's why initially, before we renamed it to Seasons Debating Organization, the name of the Facebook page was Seasons WSDC, because it was intended to just be a one-off. So I came in and I was like, "Hey guys, I'll help you out." And at that time, I did not really have much tournament organizing experience. I was never the head convener of a tournament before, so Seasons was like the first time which I was truly thrown into the position of needing to be the head convener. And at first, I was like, okay, it's going to be a WSTC tournament. It's going to be after the Serbia WSTC that year. So we're probably not going to get so much. And I thought it was just going to be a fun gig. Turns out we had about 60 teams, which in WSTC terms is nearly 30 rooms. And just to keep it into perspective, our organization team was really small. It was me, and then it was my other two other people who were helping out with graphic designing and marketing the tournament. I was doing everything from the budget, from being the treasurer, from managing the registration, from sending out IA forms, all this stuff. I was doing everything by myself. And I think that tournament was really my first, like, the kids call it the canon event, was really my first true experience in seeing how you can organize a big tournament, and it was coupled with the extra pressure of having to do a lot of the core work by myself. Because most tournaments, at least most of the Indian tournaments I've covered, they have a team. They have a really big team. They have a hierarchy. Everyone knows what to do. Everyone is doing their job. Imagine that hierarchy, but I am filling all parts of that hierarchy. It is just me doing that one thing. So that was something that's pretty insane, especially having to manage 30 teams. So of course, season WCC was a massive success. We were able to raise $1,000 for charity. I'm very very proud of that achievement. And overall, we ran a tournament pretty well too. Like we managed to somehow get a very we got a really good cap team. We got Ruth Salorme, who's like DCing Worlds, and a whole bunch of like WSCC caps. And after the tournament ended, I had a little chat. I had a chat, like a post-tournament chat with my other coworkers. It was just the three of us, by the way, at that time. Imagine three to four people, being organizing a 30-person comp all by themselves without much external help. Somehow we managed to pull through. After that, we realized Seasons is probably going to be a big name. Why not continue? So after that, we decided to host a second tournament. It was mostly going to be a small scale tournament. It was called Seasons Novice BP. It was on January. And around the time when we were planning for that tournament, the thought of making this tournament running thing and compartmentalizing it into an organization started to be an idea that had more prospect. So then eventually the next year, 2025, after we finished Seasons Novice BP, we officially decided to rename the organization to Seasons Debating Org and essentially become, I guess you could call it an NGO that's aimed to use profit to raise to create tournaments, sorry, and use those proceeds to donate to good causes. So that's been our MO this whole seasons, and it will probably be our MO for a long time. We're planning to upscale. So the question of making seasons into a certified business is something that we've discussed a lot. The decision was to probably I'm going to register the business under Malaysia as like an enterprise, so that there's really little problems when you try to pay many IAs with your personal account. A lot of problems actually highlight. So I've had my card disabled 3 times, which is very not fun. So I need to make a business account, and then I need to get an enterprise so that all that stuff. But we're still not registered under a business compared to other companies like Indo Pacific or EduDrift to name a few. We're still just kind of like a not a volunteer organization, if you could call it that, like similar to how not a club works. And recently, yeah, it's been actually really great. So we launched our own website, which is very very cool, and we're organizing seasons pre WCC, which is going to be the our flagship tournament that we're going to have. And probably we're going to have another edition of Seasons Office BP. And then around that time, as we sort of settle in and get some funds, we actually have plans to turn it into an academy, so an online academy, but not necessarily a for-profit academy. Mostly, it's going to be like we get some coaches, we kind of help people coach some kids who want to apply and like but don't have the money. So it's going to be all in all, it's going to basically be a bit of a I guess I call it a philanthropic like kind of made way where we really really want to be able to stand by what we were starting out as, which is making sure that to give back to the debaters who are in need. So seasons historically we accept waivers from almost everyone. Everyone who applies for a waiver will always get it because we as an organization believe that debating should be free and democratized to everyone. And unfortunately, given that that's not the case historically, that is what we have been trying to do. So the whole process of organizing tournaments mostly made by me to make sure that we raise money. People who raise money, all that money goes into making sure that the debaters who want to debate for free can debate for free, and eventually later on benefit from other like initiatives that we're hopefully going to take in the future. And of course, donating to charity. That's like a really big thing that we like to do.
So I think that's phenomenal work as well, right? Because you have so many different perspectives that are amalgamating where you are helping out people by maybe thinking of an academy and then also helping them out by giving them some sort of like a platform to actually increase the accessibility. So I think you're also solving this problem that we initially discussed about accessibility being an issue in a large part in debating circuits, and I think that would help a lot of people out as well. But I think just from the broader picture from seasons, I think the second part of the conversation is around convening tournaments. So have you had any like tidbits that you think would be very important advice pieces or advice points where people who are going to or thinking of convening a tournament going to be helped out with? Because I think you have a lot of experience being a core adjudicator as well as a convener. So what do you think these could probably look like for different people?
Yes, so I think I have a lot of words to say here. Um, I think the first and most important step, and thankfully a lot of conveners already follow this step, is to have a team. I have had to suffer convening tournaments by myself. It has been a pain in the butt, especially for tournaments like seasons. So I learned the hard way that you need to have a team with you because you're going to get burnt out very fast. So for Serious IB, thankfully we had a team. Thankfully I had people who I didn't have, I could lift some of the workload they did for me. So, for seasons, I was also responsible for tabbing. So I was tabbing and convening, which is really not fun. So, get a tabber. When it comes to the actual organizational part, get someone who's going to manage registration, get someone who's going to manage finances. I think you can keep it bare bones, right? You can have like maybe a group of 5 people. So someone is calling the shots, being the main tournament convener. He's organizing everything. Someone is in charge of registration. So you can manage, that person will manage registration. There'll be the mode of contact for some people in case they have inquiries. Then you have some other people who are managing the finances. Make sure they are managing the account. Make sure they're the ones giving the invoices, etc., and things like that. Make sure they are the people who are paying IAs, um, and then other people who you can help. Maybe you can have assistants under that. Because if you don't have a team, um, not only will you burn out, the work will be much more inefficient because you have to do so much work in a short period of time, and there's going to be details you miss. You realistically cannot tap a tournament at the same time whilst also managing people from Orca as an Orca member, whilst also committing to CAP, while also trying to answer 5 different questions that are coming up in like the WhatsApp group or the Discord server. It's just impossible. You need to have someone with you. Okay, so I think thankfully all tournaments have convening teams, so you probably already know this. But to those who are looking to organize tournaments, please, for the love of God, get a team. Okay, now into the more probably specialized feedback of how I would like work on convening tournaments and organizing, like to make sure that it's the best of your ability. I think the first, this comes from most novice conveners. Allow the chief adjudicators to act as advisors. Because I think the problem with most tournaments which have organizers who are starting out, is that they don't have an idea of if what they're doing is right, and their only reference point is on what they have seen other tournaments go through. And it becomes especially hard if you don't have like a senior convener who is helping out. Whenever you're getting a chief education panels you get typically are also experienced in the organization part of a tournament. So if you get a World's Cap, for example, you've also gotten a convener to help out because majors, coring a major also requires you to have a huge amount of organizational skill and also a lot of wisdom. So I think it's very important to have chief education panels help you out and give you the process. So, for example, if you are thinking about IA ships, right? Let the CAs handle that. All you need to have is an idea of what the budget is. You have the budget is. You tell the CAs this is our budget. This is how many IAs, and they can handle the rest for you. You don't have to take too much burden of yourself because I think what most organizers forget that is that having cooperating with your CAs and allowing them to do the work that you don't have to do, like maybe they can help with marketing, they should help with marketing, they can help with IAs, they should help with getting judges, and if there's a lack of manpower on the day of the tournament, they should be there to make sure the tournament runs on time. They are the ones who are calling the shots on release the draw now, release this judge allocations are final, this is the motion, release it at this time or else we want to avoid delays. So defer to your caps as modes of help in case you are lost, in case you are not experienced. If you are an experienced organizer like me or like Indo-Pacific, like Anshuman, for example, you don't have to follow the model of deferring to caps because you already know what you're doing. So, for example, some models have the OC, some tournament organizing models have the OC having a little bit more power than the caps. That's perfectly fine. The reason that happens is because the OC has a little bit more understanding of how they can manage things, which they do not require the cap to help. But in instances where you're organizing a tournament, your CAs are basically your best friend. They are also other advisors. And I think to add on to this, having a tournament advisor, like just asking someone who is a convener, they don't work on the convening with you, but they help you and give you advice. Because Tournament advisors are a really, really good thing, right? Especially if you are, again, a new convening team and you don't really know if what you're doing is correct. If you have someone who you can just ask for help, like, hey, how do we do this? How do we do that? So, for example, I was helping advise some tournaments that some people were doing for the first time, and it was just basically just they asked me, hey, how do we do this? How do we do that? And I gave some advice, like especially when it comes to things like deciding the IA budget, how much you're going to pay your IAs, what is the model you decide how to pay your IAs, deciding on things like how are we going to have DCAs, how are we going to go follow with the DCA applications, etc. Other things like what platforms, how are we going to manage these platforms, how are we going to use Zoom, how are we going to get tab, how are we going to who's going to hire tab, because I think all of those it just boils down to making sure you always have help in the process. I was fortunate enough to be able to have a pool of people who I could ask for advice, so the experience of organizing a tournament for me was not as bad. So I had a privilege of asking people who I knew was organizing tournaments, and I just helped them, and that was the reason why I was able to grow that much experience without making too much mistakes. I think the final thing, I think is the most important thing. A lot of screw ups, well, screw ups, sorry, a lot of like incidences or unfortunate cases in tournaments inevitably happen. There's going to be really big equity cases which disrupt the flow of the tournament entirely. There's going to be things like tab screwing up, and tab you cannot control whenever the tab screws up. There's going to be things like, oh, someone submitted the wrong ballot and now we have to do redraws. I think preparing for any worst case scenario is something that all organizing teams need to keep in mind. Preparing for any form of disruption to the schedule by making sure you have a plan B. So, for example, in Series IV, when the tap shut down for some reason, we do not know why. So we just decided on like right there, okay, we cannot do round two right now. Lunch break is right now. Round two later. And luckily, the tournament managed to run on time. And a lot of these really worst case things you have to prepare for, even minor things, right? Like you have a equity complaint where the team is like complaining about like a judge and they're being really, really passionate about it, or you have an instance where someone submitted the wrong ballot. All of these things you need to prepare over time and make sure you always have backup plans. So, for example, if someone decides to call out a ballot which is wrong and you need to prepare ahead of time, you need to make sure that your tab is already on point to make sure that they can redraw immediately and that the judge allocations are there. So tell your chief education panel, hey, make preform panel allocations instead of allocating in there. So preform is like you don't allocate during the draw, you allocate before the draw, and you can import the allocations into them so that you don't have to do allocations again instead of a worst case scenario. Ask your chief education panels to prepare judge allocations ahead of time so that it's easier, and make sure that the draws do not delay. Because sometimes tournaments often go through this thing where they take a long time to release the draw, and the reason that's happening is because they have not prepared. They have not really fully prepared for releasing the draw yet. They're like, oh, we need to get check in. I also think other models, such as like making sure the check-ins last a day and not per round, because if check-ins last per round, delays will happen. It is inevitable because people do not want to check in. They forget to check in. Some people are ghosting you for some reason that's going to be bad. Overall, having a lot of backup plans, and I think a good set of backup plans include making sure you have spare judges. If you have a judge supply crisis, avoid a judge supply crisis at all times by preemptively getting more judges than you originally can handle. If you have a 20 room tournament, try to get at least 25 IAs. It's fine in some of those IAs panel. The important part is making sure you never run out of judges. You never run out of judges who are capable of sharing around. If you're experiencing tab issues, make sure that you always like have a backup plan. Like go to the Excel sheets if necessary, if that's the worst case scenario. I think this is probably the best advice I could ever give, because tournament organizing is never smooth. It will always be stressful. It will always have some issues that you can never predict. So you want to be able to just preempt everything as much as possible to ensure that even if things happen, you can always end the tournament on time, and you always have a swift plan of action, cooperating with your team, cooperating with the chief education panel, cooperating with equity and tab to make sure that everything goes in order.
That's true. I think there is a lot that you said which is important to notice in a tournament as well. People don't know what happens in the background process. I've convened a couple of tournaments myself. Usually things go haywire at the day off. Not just something that you can predict, but also very unpredictable things. Sometimes I've had tournaments where either I've been participating or I've been part of the convening team where delays, like hours and hours of delays, have happened just because of equity concerns. Very unpredictable. You just don't have any power over them, but it does end up happening sometimes. So you have to prepare certain contingency plans so that it doesn't really disrupt your tournament to the extent that everybody's unhappy. Because if you don't run a tournament where people go away happy, it's more likely than not that in the next edition people might not show up as well. Because there's a lot of different things that go into the consideration when people are applying to your tournaments too. But I think apart from convening also, you said that cores play a very good role in terms of advisory positions. So you've also cored a lot of tournaments. How do you think that coring is something which is very important as a journey for you or as a debater for you, and how different the experience has been, and what you would sort of like recommend people who are maybe starting out to core or maybe planning to be better at their judging capacities to at one point reach a level where they can core tournaments?
Okay, so I think I'll start from the bottom level of how you can eventually build up to become a chief educator as like a budding debater. I think the first step is to make sure that you have a balanced CV. Make sure you have balanced debating and balanced judging. I think the problem is that some judges were able to get away with it. I think there are some judges who are purely judges and they're able to get away with scoring tournaments. The vast majority of people have a balanced CV, which is how they start scoring. The reason this is important is because understanding debates and understanding how to judge makes up a core idea of what a core adjudicator should be, which is the ability to create motions for a tournament. Why? You need to know how to debate. You need to have good debating experience because you need to have matter. You need to have stock matter. You need to have the ability to develop arguments as fast as possible. And you need to have a very good basis of things like first principle debating and just overall strong fundamentals. Because if you go in as exclusively as a judge, if you come up with a motion, you will find out that trying to come up with a case for your own motion ends up being a bit more difficult compared if you just had some debating experience, because you can know what stock arguments to run for that motion. You can know how to frame a motion because you have debated many motions that you are just extrapolating that knowledge onto. So I think it's actually very crucial that debaters, those who want to start core adjudicating, needs to know what debating is. Because if you have a good judging criteria, judging CV, and go into coring, even if you know even if you know what motions to release, I found that the kinds of motions you'll come up with tend to have a lot of problems that you cannot detect because you don't know if it's shallow, because you have not debated it before. You haven't tested it to the fullest ability, and you have a little bit of a small sample space of your own knowledge. If you are someone who does not have much debating experience but you want to core, I highly suggest just asking a lot of advice from other cores how they kind of go about this process. I'll get into the whole advice and help thing later because it's kind of relevant to even established core educators. But I think you need to have a debating experience. Obviously, you need to have judging experience. I think this is a complete like non-negotiable thing. If you don't judge, but you are a core adjudicator, most likely than not, you will not be able to understand the other half of what it comes to taking into consideration, which is motions, which is the ability of how you can judge these motions. So avoiding classic things like, is there a civil bird argument? Is there a double burden? These are things you become far more aware of as a judge, because as a judge you are taught to evaluate things, and the more you evaluate, the more you find out faults about motions that you can avoid. And as a judge, even if you start judging in a novice level, you become more aware of these things, like how emotion is constructed, how emotion is evaluated, predicting the clashes of a motion, and predicting how debaters can evaluate and go through. If you have those two things, it becomes something that helps you give a basis, even if you don't know how to like even if you don't have core drinking experience, having a baseline of these debating fundamentals and judging fundamentals is very important for you to be able to like go forward. Now on to the next step. Let's say you've passed that barrier, you're starting to get like, okay, a little bit of a caveat here on DCA applications. I think this is all very important because I think most people start out either applying for DCA and getting it. So I'll just start here. Make sure your DC. So firstly, and this is gonna be a little bit mad. Don't chat GPT your DCA application, please. AI generation tools are very easy, and as someone who has judged many kids, I can see when something is age generated. I Every single time I've had a tournament I'm coring or has been DCA applications, there's been at least one person who used ChatGPT for everything. It's very annoying. ChatGPT gets you an automatic disqualification. It's very easy to detect it. ChatGPT does nothing to help you. In that case, should you not use or should you use ChatGPT? I think ChatGPT is an aid and not something you use to just fill out everything. You can use ChatGPT to maybe articulate your thoughts a bit better. Just reword it to make it sound less AI generated. Show that you're taking effort into the application. On to the other parts like motions and like judge considerations. I think it's important to just ask a core how to fill, ask a friend who has core how they fill, how what their criteria is for DCA applications, because the hard answer is that you cannot go into a DCA application thinking that you know how to do it unless you actually ask someone else who has evaluated DCA applications and seen it. So, for example, when it comes to motions, right, we're looking for DCAs who are aware that motion setting isn't just about fun or isn't just about setting diverse themes. It's about technically analyzing what a motion actually is in order for it to be good. So, for example, this house believes that supernatural beings should a form of union. It sounds like a fun motion at advance, but if you look at it and actually scrutinize it, you will find that unfortunately it sounds a little bit wacky and should not be run in the tournament. And I think a lot of people who try to see applications will run in motions that they think are fun and unique, but it ends up unfortunately just sounding really bad because there are obvious problems with the motion. There's an obvious unclear comparative, there's obvious ambiguity in the wording. All this can just be solved if you just ask course what they are looking for, ask feedback on how you can improve your DCA application. All right, so now we go to the final step. You've become a chief educator, but this is new to you. You have no idea what you're doing. You want to figure out. Firstly, even though it's niche, there is a lot of helpful resources. The Madrid EUDC CA guide is probably the best place to go to in terms of helping you how to set motions. They give you a very core, good guide on like ensuring avoidance of things like double burdens, how to get depth, how to get balance. Reading that guide and just understanding how you can apply it is something that's very important. There's also other guides. I think they are very helpful, like um, videos on YouTube where you have major CAs which like go through the process of what their thought process is when they're organizing motions. So I actually have a resource on my Facebook page, it's pinned on my post, where I basically just compile a list of resources on how to chief educate. It's like how to core for dummies, and it's basically like it's a little bit of self marketing here, but honestly, genuinely, even without, I benefit nothing if you access that course. It's literally just a document with a bunch of links. I get nothing. I have You get everything if you want to be if you're a chief educator, you're new and you want to access that link. It's basically many links, and I think that's probably the best advice. First is just to make sure that you're accessing resources that teach you how to cap. The second and most obvious one is to ask other people how they cap. What is their mindset for setting motions? So how do they set a motion? How do they make sure it is a good motion? What is their mindset when they're testing motion, etc.? Always test your motions. I have like a lot of friends who I just ask for advice. I ask, hey, what do you think of this motion? Is it insane? Is it not insane? And I always make sure that I have gone through an external vetting process of my motions, unless it's a stock motion that I can reuse. Of course, I don't need to go through the vetting process. But if it is a new motion that I want to run for creativity, then I will run it. So, for example, this house opposes the commercialization of Ramadan, which is the motion I said recently for Ramadan to be open. That one is completely new. I was like, okay, I'm going to go to my Muslim debaters, see how deep this is. And then they were like, okay, it's good. So then it became successful. I think overall, ask for help from other senior chief educators, chief adjudicators, and make sure that you get advice. Make sure that you always have a resource where you're referring to how to chief adjudicate, even if it is your first time and you don't know much. And obviously, you have to build it up with experience, right? The more you core, the more you get experience, the more wise you become, the more like aware of the work you become. But when you are starting out, it's important that you again have that fundamentals and you build up your fundamentals through your debating, through your judging, and eventually just learning the theories of coring. Like that's what I call it, the theories of coring, so that you can eventually build up from the fundamental base and eventually become a good core later on down the line.
Perfect. I think you also highlighted there are a couple of things that judges need to also be very careful about and they need to also do. I think one of the things that probably people will get a lot of idea from when talking to you is how judges can be better. So judging is also a very important part of debating, and apart from debaters, there are a lot of people who don't really want to go into judging because simply on the fact that they find speaking more lucrative or speaking more interesting. But it's also very important that judging is done properly, right? Because without judges, debates don't really run. So how do you think judges can improve in their journey? What kind of basic things that they need to cover? What are some drills or pointers that you can give them which would improve them in their journey as well?
Okay, so I think the first most obvious one, which I won't spend too much time on, is just the idea of there are so many workshops on judging. Watch those workshops. Um, I think Manchester Debating Union workshop series has one on judging as well. You should watch that. I have some YouTube videos on judging. You can watch that. But even without me, even without Manchester, you can just look up YouTube judging workshops, and you will often find that there are many helpful resources for beginners. On to the actual advice that I will give. The first and most important step when you are starting out as a judge, in my opinion, is to read the world's manual on judging. And this is something a lot of judges actually miss. They kind of see the manual, they think it's intimidating, so they don't read it. And I'm like, I'm sorry, if you want to be a judge, you need to understand what the concept of an average reasonable voter is. You need to understand the concept of what a burden is that the team sets on themselves. You need to understand the concept of metrics, right? Like, the four-step process of metrics. It is if it is agreed upon explicitly, if it is agreed upon implicitly, which team weighs upon their metric to be more important, what the average reasonable voter thinks would be important. A lot of judges don't know that. Like, it's very unfortunate to say, a lot of novice judges don't know what that is a criteria, and they end up using the fourth step instead of the first step, which is stepping in, which what they think the criteria should be. Because everything in the world's manual basically gives you a good guideline of how a personality or what the character of a judge should be. What is it does it mean to be unbiased? What does it mean to not step in? What does it mean to fundamentally be in a position where you are not using your personal feelings to adjudicate? How is it that you credit things like contradictions? How do you credit things like tensions? How do you evaluate claims based on the level of analysis given? What is the standards of evaluating a claim? Like, a lot of the world's manual is already giving many judges the ability to understand how to judge. Unfortunately, a lot of novice judges who are either forced into judging because they can't debate, or they want to start judging but they don't know where to start, they see the manual and they're like, I'm not going to read this manual. I don't need it. And no, unfortunately, you need it. I have had, even to this day, I look at the world's manual every now and then if I have like a dilemma about judging, and it usually solves it. Obviously, it's not the one-stop everything for literally everything to improve as a judge. I think the world's manual can only carry you so far. The rest is all about your effort to improve in your judging. So that is one thing. So read the world's manual. In terms of starting out, especially if you're a novice judge, so the way I started out is I did not throw myself into tournaments immediately. I actually had a period before I went into my first ever tournament as a judge where I judged a bunch of spars. And even though some of my calls were obviously incorrect, and my friends told me, your call is wrong, unfortunately, your call is bad. What that did actually is not just in terms of improvement, but it got me to desensitize. Got me desensitized to the worst case outcome of a judge, which is that you get tanked and you don't break. And it prepares you and it helps you understand that judging as the nature is a sport where you are at the mercy of teams, and there is unfortunately not much you can do about that. You could give the best OA of your life and you would still have a team which is salty because they didn't want to win. You cannot control that. It's just unfortunate. But you need to be prepared for that. You need to understand that judging as a sport, a bit of it is out of your control, and there's just not much you can do about it. What you can do is see how you can improve, how you can attempt to minimize the risk of getting tanked, how you can improve the wording of your OA. But all in all of that comes from making sure you always have practice. So judge a spar every now and then, even if you're not an experienced chair. Just try and do it. Get feedback from debaters. See, because debaters often give feedback well on how they want judges to give OAs, and you should try to integrate that into your OA. So that's something I did a lot when I was judging out as a judge. I just asked debaters, how's my OA? And they're like, yeah, I thought your OA was good. I think you could do this by Z, and I would integrate that. And I think this is very, very important, especially in tournaments, especially in spars. Spars is a great place to help you judging. So, like, when you're starting out, it's very, very important that you have experience outside of tournaments, because if your only experience is tournaments, I think you end up plateauing quite easily. Because if your only experience is tournaments, you're exposed to an environment where it's very unpredictable. But in spars, it's very controlled. You can ask for feedback quite well, and etc. Right? You have a lot of help, right? So that is very important. I think the final piece of advice I would give, and this is probably the most important advice I have: figure out your judging identity. So what do I mean by this? Every judge has a very distinct method of how they judge. They have very distinct ways of how they choose to evaluate certain things, because judging at the end of the day is a subjective game. As much as we can try to claim we are being objective, we are following the rules of debating, at the end of the day, how you evaluate one argument can be very different from how other judges argument. So understanding that, and understanding that you as a judge have specific strengths and weaknesses, figuring out those strengths and weaknesses is something that's very important. So to give an example, the reason that a lot of people, the way that I've been evaluated as a judge, or people have commented on my judging, is that I am very track heavy judge. I track just about literally everything because I have the ability to track everything, and I have the ability to sort out through everything I've read, everything I've seen on my notes, and just kind of develop an OA which is able to integrate about everything that the team has said and evaluating it as much as possible. So typically, I will have five different ways of evaluating one clash. Obviously, the trade-off is that my OAs are very long. That is my weakness. So my weakness is that I'm not time efficient because I prioritize detail over efficiency. So I think it's a good example of understanding what makes you a good judge. Like really just sitting down when you look at your past OAs, you look at your past performances, you look at your past feedback, and you understand what makes you a good judge. What are teams complimenting about your OAs? What are judges complimenting about your OAs? Is it your ability to be rigorous in tracking? Is it your ability to think about really compelling insights that other judges would have not picked up? Is it your ability to be efficient and compartmentalize the dynamics of a comparison in just a few phrases and still have it encapsulate everything? These are strengths and also weaknesses, right? Like weaknesses, like what am I drawing back behind? How can I improve on those weaknesses? These are things which build up over time of your career of judging. You figure out what you're good at, you figure out what you're bad at eventually, but you need to understand these are the things I hone upon to become a good judge. Because in the highest level, a lot of the judges in the highest level are fundamentally different judges from each other. There's different judging cultures, there's different judging philosophies. There's going to be finals where clearly there's one team and there are two teams which have a chance to win, and it all boils down to judge philosophy, how a judge sees that team, and that philosophy can be legitimate in of itself. Your goal is to encapsulate how you can develop your philosophy in judging and how you can articulate your judging in a way where you're always persuasive, even if in the calls which are very tight and it could be any team which wins. Because at the end of the day, people don't realize this, but the level of judging is not measured by catering to teams. Your quality as a judge is hugely decided by your ability to give a good OA, to persuade others that your call is correct. And obviously, no call is correct. You could give a crazy insane call, and somehow if you could justify it, good for you. That call is probably legitimate in your own eyes, and that's just the game that judging is. Similarly, I could give a call which has some one to two things that other judges would not agree upon, but they would think that was legitimate because I articulated my thoughts and was able to persuade them that my thought was legitimate. I think it all becomes, and it all sort of boils down to how you figure out what is your philosophy in judging, what are you good at, what are you bad at, and then developing those skills, and eventually you will become better as a judge. Because I think the problem is that judges have a little bit of an identity crisis of, I'm not really sure how I can improve as a judge. I'm plateauing. I break in some tournaments. I don't break in some tournaments. I get feedback. I'm not sure why I can improve on that feedback. Figure out your identity, and I think that's something that will give you a lot of leeway in improving later on in the future.
I think that was a very interesting perspective as well, because I think judges do have different philosophies and different circuits, right? So even if we are a speaker, we do analyze these things differently when we go internationally to tournaments. Even for example, in UADC, you will find different judges from different backgrounds. I remember that once I did Worlds, there was a judge very particularly in a round who had prioritized certain impacts and had convinced the other judges in the panel of the call as well. And this was a judge from Japan who had a very different philosophy from maybe the chair who was from Europe or somebody else. So there are different things that you need to sort of like debate around or sort of think around in terms of how you are approaching the debate case, but also how you're approaching judging as a practice as well. And I think that was very importantly visible also from the way that you were presenting it. Just as we end off, couple of final pieces of questions for you, and just to let the viewers know you a bit better as well. Anything very particularly unique as a story which you would say ki, right, this is something that I really want to remember from my debating journey, apart from the ones that probably are very interesting and you've already mentioned. So anything very, very standing, outstandingly brilliant where you were sort of like taken aback by what happened, or any such experiences?
Um. Okay, this probably gonna take me time to think. So I'll probably think about it. It's like, oh, compelling stories that have changed my debating in some fundamental way. Um. Okay. So okay. Hold on. All right. So I think back when I was um in like first year or second year. So sorry. Yeah. So I'm thinking about it. Yeah. Okay. Back when I was in, I think between first or second year, I think I was at a point in time where I was a little bit burnt out. So I think this was either post UADC 2024 or pre UADC 2024. And I think again, this is every debaters event where they spent quite a lot of time debating experience and they get burned out quite easily. I think everyone goes through this at some point where even if you have these really nice achievements, what happened to me after UADC 2024 was actually kind of interesting because after UADC 2024, for the first time in my life, I had lost the ability to go on, or at least I thought I lost the ability to continue. And it wasn't because of anything depressing in particular, like I am tired. It was this sudden realization where I have reached the goal I wanted to reach in the 1+ year I had debated. I am now there, and I don't know what to do with myself. And it was such a thralling realization. It was like this is what everyone talks about, like self-actualization or achieving your final goal. People don't talk about what happens afterwards. People don't realize that you will still live a life. You're going to wake up in the morning after you have won a tournament that has meant so much to you. Like this is something that's crazy that people don't realize. But after you have won, have you really won in the long term? If the next day you wake up and you realize, what do I do now? And I think this was something that I really struggled with at after UADC, after AP season, where I just didn't really know what to do with myself anymore. I didn't really have like thing, and I was actually contemplating retiring. I actually was just like, okay, I'm not gonna compete anymore. I'm gonna go UAD. I'm done competing. I'm happy with my career. I'm just like I'm not really happy with the sport anymore. Not happy as in like I regret the sport. In terms of I'm not happy because I've done what I wanted, and I don't think I would be happy to continue on. So I took a little bit of a sub of like a I would call it like a little like kind of casual, not really a hiatus, but like a I stepped back a little bit. I stepped back and I was just ready to just like, okay, I have a UADC 2024 Grand Finals panel. I can basically get any IA ship I want. I will now just treat debating as a side hustle instead of a sport. So in that period, it was most just a complete burnout. I had no desire to improve as a speaker or no desire to improve as a judge. One fine day, I get invited to this local tournament. It's a four room comp. It's legit just a four-room comp in Malaysia. I was like I saw this tournament. It was cheap. I was like, okay, I'm gonna debate there with my friends. I'm just gonna debate there. I asked my friend to come from another state. I asked my friend to also help out. And in that experience, we were debating in a way which was completely not serious. So just for context, every time before the round, it was AP, so it's three people. Every time before the round, we would spin a wheel to decide who's going to speak first, second, and third. We were not taking it seriously at all. And when we were debating, I I would speak my usual way, which is like intense, a bit angry, but I would also crack a bunch of jokes. So I was debating with one of my friends, right? It was in like an IR debate, and I POI'd them, and I was like, I said you are lying, and that became like a running joke between us, where you were like, where like everyone would know about that event, where I'm like, you are lying, and I said it in a way which was so intense and so funny that everyone had a laugh. Um, but basically, the experience was mostly just we are not here to debate because we want to win. We are here to debate because friends are with us and friends are around. And I think in that moment where after the tournament where we're in the Airbnb with our group of friends, we're playing Monopoly, we're gossiping, and we're just like saying funny stories, etc., and things like that. We're playing card games. That was when I made the realization that I've been viewing debating in a way which was so wrong. And I was viewing debating in a way which was so toxic, and I realized I should change. Because prior to this, debating to me was everything. Debating to me was literally my everything that decided my self-worth. Like, and it was something that even my seniors pointed out that was very dangerous for me to have, where they would tell me, you are taking debating too seriously, and this is affecting your mental health. And I didn't want to admit it. I didn't want to admit it. I didn't want to say I'll be fine. I know how to manage myself. I didn't. I always felt like I needed to do this judging thing. I needed to prove myself to the world or something for some, like, I don't know. And you know how thralling it is to spend 1 year literally going through the whole, like, grind set, like the burnout grind set, forcing yourself to be good at tournaments, forcing yourself to making sure that every break counts, every out round counts, etc., and things like that, every time, etc., only to then finally reach where you wanted to go through and realize you are empty is crazy. Is it very, very like depressing realization. But then when I was in this tournament and I was speaking, I realized that debating at the end of the day, and this might sound insensitive, but I'm going to say it anyways. Debating is just a hobby where people yell at each other for fun, and it should be treated like that. Like, yeah, it's a sport. You gotta win. There's a lot of stakes when it comes to winning, and there's a lot of like things that really, really encapsulate you, like really forms your identity. But you have to remember that in 5 years, you're not going to debate anymore. You're going to go to work. You're going to start a family. You'll probably remember your debating as a part of your career, unless you're Harish or Ashish and debating is basically their whole life now where they continue debating. But the vast majority of people will quit either way. Like both of us one day we're probably just gonna retire, not because we are tired of debating, but we are growing up. We're becoming adults. We're gonna reach our 30s, and when you're 30, you have to worry about other things compared to debating. Especially, I would say that most people quit when they're 25, unless you want to be a dino. Then I will probably be a dino, and I'll be happy with that. But I probably won't be a dino for so long. Eventually, when I do turn into a dino, and I think it's important that you remember that debating is, at the end of the day, a hobby that is fun to do. And when it comes to hobbies that are fun to do, what brings you back is just the people you spend time with. So that tournament reminded me very, very vividly when I was just lying down, when I went back home, that I realized that I didn't miss debating because I was succeeding. I missed debating because I had a group of friends who made it fun to be around debating. Like I won a tournament, but when I won the tournament and when the announcement came to me, I didn't like jump and celebrate. Hey, I won a tournament. It was just like, oh, hey, cool, I won the tournament. And but what mattered more to me wasn't winning the tournament. It was the fact that I had spent a weekend with my friends. I'd spent a weekend meeting people and getting to bond with them, enjoy with them. I'd say that was more fun. The post-tournament celebration at the bar afterwards was much more fun than actually winning the tournament, because it's a four-room tournament. Like, yeah, there were cash prizes, but it was a four-room tournament. There was really nothing deep about a tournament. I don't even include it in my CV. But that tournament still meant so much to me because it made me realize that things like enjoying the sport outside of competing are so crucial for keeping you in debating. I'd say that it was that experience that got me to chug a little bit of experience a bit more. Maybe go for one more year of competing at majors, because now the priority isn't winning. The priority is travel, see things that you like, make friends, get experiences, and maybe drink with some friends and gossip, maybe get a little bit drunk and tipsy, and maybe like let's like just have a little bit of fun, spend time, and just really, really get to know people, because debating is a community, and I think you need to treat it as a community. And I think that's why a lot of novice debaters who have debated for 3 5 years, like the novices, 10 novices, they are not, even if they are novices, they're not like depressed that they have been stuck there. The reason that they have been novices is because they don't take debating seriously. But that's an experience which is actually kind of nice, because if you're at a position where you realize that debating is just it's just a place where we yell at each other and I just want to be here for fun, I think you end up becoming a happier debater at the end of the day. And I think that's something I've realized recently, where recently I've been like, okay, I'm gonna just compete, not because I want to win, because I just want to do it because I find it enjoyable and I want to hang out with my friends. And I think people, especially if you're in that 1 to 2 year period of your intermediate phase where you're starting to feel burnout, that's a very important realization to make, or else you're going to quit anyways, and you're going to quit not in good terms but in bad terms. At least I know that even if I quit one day, I will know that I've had a meaningful life in debating. And I think you need to understand that having a meaningful life in debating is not like being a starving artist. It's about realizing that the sport is not that deep. It is deep to a certain extent, but it is not that deep to dedicate everything to. Enjoy the sport not for what it is in terms of competition, but what it is for everything else. So yeah, I think a little nice positive note to end like this conversation on.
Very true. I think the last thing that I can possibly just ask you is probably the fact that there are a lot of people who would be inspired by what you've done, probably, and also would say that maybe you are somebody who was to look up to, and then you have sort of like information which they will find very valuable. So, any such places where you would direct the attention of these individuals, like what are your socials, where can we find you, what do you do, where we can reach out to you, and also any resources which you would recommend, and just your final thoughts on what this journey has been, and then as we part?
I'll push this into three parts. Firstly, get a Facebook account. I get having a Facebook account is necessary for a debater. There's no exception to this. If you don't have a Facebook account, you will not be able to access groups such as debate series posting. You'll not be able to access many different regional groups such as like Malaysian debating or the Indian parliamentary debating calendar. I think that was what it's called. All these groups are really important because that's where you get the news for tournaments. Second, the global debating spreadsheet. You want to compete internationally, but you don't know where, go to the global debating spreadsheet and go to any calendar or debating that you can access. I'm not sure if Indian circuit has a debating calendar that they have, but if they do, look at that calendar. Find out where you can compete. If it's online, cool. That's so good for you. If it's offline, great. Now you can debate for fun with people. You can meet people. So, but all in all, find calendars and sheets that give you information on when tournaments are. Thirdly, this is probably the most important resource I'll recommend. It is called the Debate Resource Compilation. It's an Excel sheet. I can probably link it. You can probably link it. It is essentially an Excel sheet that contains a collection of almost every single workshop dating from I think early 2010s to 2024. It is a workshop. It is a workshop collection of literally everything from judging to even matter filing to even things like how to debate hypothetical motions. Like every workshop on everything is there, and I think for those who want to improve but don't know where to go, that is an incredibly good resource for you to rely on. Finally, a little bit of self promotion. Imran Debating channel is my channel. I post recordings there, so you can watch some pretty cool recordings. I recommend watching Pakistan pre-ABP recordings and also Series IV recordings because those were pretty high quality rounds. But I also post other workshops there. So not just my workshops, I post workshops from Pakistan Debate Forum, which like they use my channel as like a way to there. I post workshops from this other Pakistani organization called Debate Symposium, and I'll probably also publish other workshops that come from other series like Seasons is planning to do a workshop series soon, so it's going to be on that channel. Overall, yeah, I hope people can access these resources, and these same resources help me. Well, obviously not my YouTube channel. The YouTube channel I make to help others, but the first three definitely what I had done to be able to improve a lot as a debater by being able to access because education in debating is very democratized. Thankfully, you don't need a coach to be able to improve. You can just watch a bunch of workshops and you will eventually get it. But yeah, that's what I would say.
Perfect way to end off, I guess. Thank you, Imran. It was very insightful to have you here, and I believe that there was a lot of things that we could take away a lot from. Um, just check out Imran's socials as well. I'll just try to link everything down below as well at the end of the day. Thank you so much again. It was a pleasure to have you, and hope to see you again soon in the channel. Thank you.
Absolutely fun to be here. Thank you so much. I had a good time. I had a really fun time.